Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Chapel York's, final for this series, philanthropy briefing. We're very excited to be talking about the issues facing street children. It's such an important time after this pandemic. It's always important, but it's particularly a time when this has really been in the forefront in a lot of people's minds. And the charities that we have have been working for a number of years in their particular fields. So this is going to be a really informative opportunity to really understand from the front lines what's going on and what this is all the last year and a half has meant to a lot of people and continues to mean to a lot of children and to a lot of families. Just a quick thank you for those of you who are here today to listen to this, because it's going to be so fascinating. The rules are, this is not a pitch, so the charities are going to be talking about what they do, not about asking for money, because we know the needs there, but that's not what this is about. This is all about information and about learning more about what they do. We're going to have about 10-15 minutes per charity, and then there'll be a chance afterwards to ask questions. There is a chat area down below, so if you want to ask a question and put it up, I'll be glad to ask it for you. If not, you can just ask at the time. I'm Nancy Bixon. I'm the Managing Director of Chapel York, and on behalf of Chapel York and our foundations, we're very pleased to be offering this exciting and really interesting opportunity for you and for the charities. So I'll get started, because you don't want to hear from me, you want to hear from them. I'm going to first go on to Pia McRae, and Pia is the CEO, brand new CEO of the Consortium for Street Children. And the Consortium of Street Children is a really interesting organization that brings together a number of other organizations. It's a global network, 130 community organizations across the world, to really be able to bring a greater voice to this very needed problem. So Pia, if I can turn it over to you, and very interested to hear what you're doing.
Great. Morning, everyone, and thank you, Nancy and team, so much for making this event happen. I'm Pia, and I am really chuffed to be with you this morning. So, as Nancy said, I'm new to the Consortium for Street Children. I joined about a month ago, and thinking about this session and thinking about what to share with you, I just sort of thought, applying for this job wasn't for me a traditional step up, in the sense of I was going to take a job with bigger budgets or a much larger team, or certainly wasn't a bigger salary. But it was definitely the reason why I decided to take the role, was because for me it was a step up in the sense of taking a job with a very clear sense of purpose. And that's why a month ago I joined the organization, and I applied for the role because of the compelling vision of the Consortium for Street Children, which is about having a world where the rights of street children are guaranteed just as much as they're guaranteed for other children. And that resonated massively with me. I've lived for many years in Asia, 14 years in China, 2 in India, traveled a lot in the region, and I've worked in child protection in Asia. And so that vision really resonated for me. But I also applied for the job because of that operational model that Nancy talked about, having this very small core team who work with an amazing group of organizations who are members of our network, many of them smaller national organizations. And we also work with a range of other actors, including our super research forum, who are all sort of volunteer academics, and our amazing brand ambassadors who were street children themselves. And we see our job as being about providing the data, the evidence, the policy push, the advocacy, and selective partnerships to increase the impact of all these committed organizations and individuals working with street children. So we try and keep our team very small and focused, but it is absolutely brilliant to be with this morning with 2 of our network members. So Maura from the Hope Foundation and Lynn from Toybox, who are both members of our network, and I know do amazing work with street connected children. So why does this matter? When my son was born, I was living in Beijing, and my husband is a Chinese citizen, but we had agreed that my son would be given a British passport. But the problem was that at the time, and we're talking about 20 years ago, so things may well have changed, the authorities couldn't legally recognize that a child born of a Chinese father in China could not be Chinese. And yet China doesn't allow for dual citizenship. So he couldn't both be Chinese and British. So how could we ensure legally that my son would be recognized as having been born in China, but being British while we were in China? So I went to talk to friends in the Chinese diplomatic service who were working for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and they came back to me and said, your son needs to go to the nearest public security bureau and renounce his Chinese citizenship. And I was like, he's a month old, he can't do that. So they went back and then they came back to me and they said, just put somebody else down on the birth certificate. Put down one of your British friends. And I was like, no, I'm not going to be doing that. And we did finally find a solution after quite a few months and calling in a few favors. But it really taught me a lesson, which is, if it could be that hard for me with all the resources I had, what about all the children in China at the time who were being born in the shadows because their parents were exceeding the one-child policy? Or what about in other parts of the world where children are caught up in conflict? Or what about children whose parents, for a whole myriad of reasons, don't have the correct paperwork themselves? In none of these cases is it the fault of the child that they don't have the right birth registration documents. And when I joined Consortium for Street Children a month ago, one of the themes that came up in the partner calls is around the impact of COVID and not having the correct documentation for street children. And I'm sure Moira will talk more to you about the situation in India, but one example was a conversation I had with Sanjay Gupta, who leads the Chetna organization based in Delhi, but working across India. And when I talked to Sanjay, it was at the peak of the second COVID wave in India. And he was saying how incredibly difficult that second wave had been, both because humanitarians and workers themselves didn't want to go out and provide services. But even when they did, the problem was that the ration tickets, the system that had been set up by the government to have ration tickets for absolutely life-saving food needed documents. You needed an ID document to get the ration tickets in the first place. So it was, no proof of identification, no ration tickets, no food. And that's just one practical example of what not having identification can mean. The difference between food rations or not, it can be the difference between being able to access education, health, other services such as justice, inheritance, family reunification, a whole range of issues. And the UN, gives advice to countries, and as they put it, at a minimum, countries should ensure that free, accessible, simple, expeditious birth registration is available to all children at all ages. And they specifically advise that for street children, they should be supported to proactively obtain legal identity documents. And if that's not possible, there should be flexible, innovative, temporary solutions such as providing informal identity cards linked to civil society personnel or their addresses to allow children in the short term to be able to access basic services and protection in the justice system. So what are we doing about it in the Consortium for Street Children? Well, in 2017, we worked with our partners and did a global consultation where we including talking to many street children themselves. And the street children themselves identified 3 policy areas that were really, really important to them. One was around status offences, which is around children being criminalised for offences like running away from home, begging, loitering in public spaces, which gets them then into the judicial system and potentially into prison. So how do you deal with that specific issue? The second issue they talked about a lot was police roundups. But the third issue was this issue of legal identity, and 2 critical issues emerged. One was around retroactive replacement birth registration documents, but the second was around can children apply for citizenship? And so having got this, we then found a brilliant pro bono partner, Baker and McKenzie, who also sort of supported us with some core costs, who said, well, let's map out the world's policy space in those 3 areas, and in the area of legal identity, looking at those specific 2 areas around retroactive birth registration and application for citizenship. And so with them, we created a legal atlas which maps out every country and what the policy space looks like for street children. And so that legal atlas, if you go onto our website, you can see the legal framework in each country, which allows a child to obtain retroactive or replacement birth registration documents. And we managed to get this set up with extraordinary support from an army of volunteers marshalled by Baker and McKenzie, including lawyers from their clients team, which is just amazing. And it's a brilliant resource for advocates, for lawyers, for journalists, for advocacies, activists. But also, interestingly, when we look at Google Analytics, we're pretty confident that that resource is being accessed by street children themselves because of the nature of some of the questions that they're asking to get onto the website. So this shows a little bit what the legal atlas looks like and how it comes up on the screen. And I think it's worth saying, of course, putting up something, a resource like this doesn't in itself actually change anything. The next step, you have to then be able to take the next steps, which is the point we're at in an organization. So what could those next steps look like? Well, it's about advocating for change in the legal requirements. And this could be about changing some of the legal requirements to get that certification. So for instance, in Algeria, the process of retroactive birth registration or replacement birth certificate is pretty much inaccessible for street-connected children who need to produce a certificate of residence, a nationality certificate, a special 12S birth certificate, which in itself is very difficult to get, as well as a blood type card. So just one example. Another common challenge in terms of legal requirements is that in many countries, applications need to be made by parents, not the child, which is challenging for children who do not know or may not live with their parents, especially where there are unclear regulations about transfer of guardianship for a child. And sometimes it's not the law itself which is the problem, it's the reality of accessing your legal rights. So for instance, through that legal atlas, we've been able to identify that in Bolivia and Angola, as examples, access to the registration points is really difficult, just literally getting to the places where you need to do it to process the paperwork. And that can be super challenging. Even if the legal framework and practicalities are more user-friendly for street children, they will, of course, often need help in navigating the system with an appropriate adult, sometimes with some pro bono legal support. And that's something that we are working with. So we're working with many of the members of our networks to start moving into this next step of how do you then set up the facilities to provide that additional support. I do want to make the point also that the legal atlas isn't all about pointing the finger and talking about where things are wrong. We think it's really important to amplify where things are being got right. So as an example, and that's part of our job as well, is to help countries who are trying to do the right thing and saying, oh, you're telling us it's wrong, but give us an example of where it's right, trying to say, how do we amplify that and share examples of really good practice? So for example, in Bangladesh, if a child remains unregistered, health assistants, teachers, policy officers, police officers, medical officers, and other people of authority can initiate the process to register a child. So that's a great example of a country that's put in enabling legislation in this place, something that we can advocate for. I sort of wanted to finish by kind of saying, we are talking about paperwork and bureaucracy and ID cards, but I sort of want to make the point that this is that your ID is about a much larger issue. Giving street connected children back their identity is of course it's about official paperwork, which is really important, but it's also about giving them back an identity which isn't being a street child, which isn't being put into that box. Each child we're talking about has a unique identity, like I do, like you do. They might like mints more than butterscotch, or they might be good at ball games or prefer going to the library. They might be tall, they might be short, they might be black-haired, they might be red-haired. And they definitely, like all of us, want to be able to create their own identity. And I think the work we do as a consortium, in partnership with the members of our network and other organizations, is all about recognizing the unique individual identity of each child, and trying to give them greater agency over that identity. I just love this quote that I've put up from Mandela, Nelson Mandela, who memorably said, "There can be no keener revelation of a society's soul than in the way it treats its children." Street children are not a single homogeneous, clearly defined group. As I said, they all have multiple identities. Each child has multiple identities and relationships, but what they do share is a dependence on the streets for their survival and development. And often they have issues around this challenge of legal identity. And I think through the prism of their lives and the experiences they have, it really brings into stark relief many of the challenges to understanding and acting on some of the causes and barriers to make child rights a reality. And, ensuring that they have legal identity is an absolute fundamental part of helping them be active citizens in their own right. And I'm really, really looking forward to listening to Maura and Lynn and hearing what they're going to share with you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Pia. That was so interesting because it really brought out some points that I think lots of us have never, considered some of the issues that children address. It's just an invisible problem, so that was so helpful. Thank you very much for that. Now I'm going to turn to Lynn Morris at Toybox, and Toybox has been part of your consortium, and Lynn has been on your board, I understand. So that's a great opportunity. Toybox has been going for over 25 years and works in Latin America and Asia and Africa, and really on the front lines with street children and with partnering with them. So Lynn, let me turn this over to you to tell us about Toybox and the amazing work that you do.
Perfect. Thank you, Nancy. And as Pia says, thank you so much to the team for organising today. I think for me, the opportunity to talk about street children is just so exciting. And the UN classify them as one of the most vulnerable groups in the world. And so often there's no debate and there's no conversation about these children. And I'm sort of the perfect segue from Pia because Toybox is one of those organizations working with local partners and doing that backbreaking daily work, working with children on the ground. We focus exclusively on street children, and the definition of street children that we use is children that are working or living on the streets. But I do think as time goes by, we need to, at Toybox, look at that definition and decide how do we also encompass those children who are really working on the street, but they're hidden on the street. So over recent years, street children have become a commodity. They're used in domestic situations, they're used in commercial sex situations, but they're hidden and they're behind barriers. So how do we get access to those children? And I think that's one of the challenges that we at Toybox are facing more and more on a daily basis, because it's easy to see the child sleeping out on the street, or the child standing at the traffic lights and selling produce at the traffic lights. But where are these hidden children? So I'm going to give you a very, very quick brief history of Toybox. As Nancy says, we were started 25 years ago. A couple were actually watching a BBC documentary, and this BBC documentary was about street children in Guatemala. And it was how the police were forcibly moving these children on. And they couldn't believe that this situation existed. So hopped on a plane, went over, saw that it saw the depravity, saw the situation that some children were living in, and thus Toybox was born. I always get asked about our name. Everybody says to me, what on earth is your name about? And I think very simply, when Toybox was founded all those years ago, the thought was every child deserves a childhood. And a toy box with, its giraffes falling out or its books falling out was the visual representation of the childhood that every child should have. We started all those years working ago in Latin America. So our knowledge base has grown from Latin America, and over the years, we have also started to work in India. So Pia, I know Chetna and Sanjay really well. He's one of our partners on the ground. They are an amazing organization that do great stuff. So we support them in India. We support partners in Nepal, in Kenya, and in Sierra Leone. But I would say our real knowledge base is still Central America. So we have partners in Guatemala and in El Salvador and in Bolivia. And here we're very much involved in the issue of birth registration, as I'll go on to in a minute, but also the issue of gang violence and how children are sucked into that environment, because if they find that home life isn't fantastic, there seems to be something attractive about having a group of friends on the street where you've got the freedom to do what you want to do, etc. Of course, they find out very quickly that the situation is vastly different when they get onto the streets. In addition to supporting with our partners with those gang activities, we do 3 other things. And I think social care would be a good description of number 1, and providing food, providing medical care, providing clothing. So that emergency first step. And for us, that is really, really important, because we find that when the child is on the street, their faith, their confidence in adults is at an all-time low. Most of the adults that they have actually met have abused them or misused them in some way. So the journey of starting to rebuild confidence in adults, and that some adults really do want to support you, can begin with, dental support, or, a Band-Aid, or removing lice from the child's hair, something as basic as that. Then we would move on to saying, okay, we're hosting a sports session. There's a basketball match tomorrow, or there's a drama workshop. So slowly getting this child involved in activities that aren't about the street and aren't about that gang culture on the street. So sports, brilliant. Drama, brilliant. And sometimes when I say that that's what we do, people go, oh, that might strike a little bit superficial, because you're talking about, one of the most vulnerable groups in the world. Shouldn't you be in doing more, Lynn? More, quicker, get the children off the street. But it's a really slow process. And as Pia said, we are all individuals, and each child has had their journey, and we need to work with each child to that place where they go, actually, I'm comfortable to come off the streets again, or I'm comfortable to go back to my family if appropriate. During this time, clearly education, training, skills, all of that type of stuff where, we need to give these children the opportunity to be functioning members of society. So whether it's formal education back into school, or whether it's some informal way of engaging with children, we really do try and do that on a regular basis with them as well. But I'm going to come to birth registration or identity, because that is a big old part of Toybox's work as well. And I'm going to run through some facts and figures. So we know that 1 in 4 under 5s don't officially exist, so their governments aren't aware of them. For us in Toybox, we know in El Salvador there's 670,000 children who are unregistered, in Guatemala it's 700,000, and in Bolivia the estimate is that 23% of under 12s don't have a legal identity. So if you're like me, I love all the facts and figures, they're all really interesting, but what does that actually mean? So I wanted to tell you about a lad I met in Guatemala City, pre-COVID naturally, and all our travel restrictions, but his name's Carlos, and he is 12. And I have got a son who's 14, so being able to make the connection with Carlos was quite painful, joyful, but also really eye-opening for me. Carlos is in the 2nd grade. He's unable to progress because he doesn't have any identity, so he's stuck in this grade. So each year he goes back because he wants to learn, he's desperate to learn, but there's younger and younger children coming into his classroom. So of course he's mocked and everybody takes the mickey out of him, which is just diabolical. So he's not going to progress any further. He had severe toothache when I met him. He had nowhere to go. And we all know what toothache can be like. It's all encompassing. He had nowhere to go. He had no support to get. His chances of ever going into the formal education are limited. He's stuck where he is. The chance of him getting a job, very, very small. The chance of him buying a house, the chance of him opening a bank account, the chance of him getting married, all these things that we take for granted, because when you get married, you have to prove your identity. We have to have our identity to, open a bank account. So all of these things are just closed to him, and his life becomes more and more challenging because all these doors are closed. All the doors that are open for me are closed for Carlos. So I said to him, what is it? What is the biggest thing for you about having your identity? And he said, in Guatemala, if you are an unregistered person, you can be placed in a mass grave with an X, 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 X. Your name's not even given there. And that, as a 12-year-old boy, was his greatest fear, that he was going to go and be put in an unmarked grave when he died. He's 12. My 14-year-old is only concerned about where he is in some gaming thing. It broke my heart. As the adult in the relationship, I also knew that he's at greater risk of ending up in an adult prison because he can't prove his name. So he'll go through an adult judicial process and into an adult prison in Guatemala. I also know there's a chance in some countries where he can get co-opted into the military at a younger age because he can't prove how old he is. So this teeny tiny little bit of paper is transformational in his life. Transformational. It starts a journey where he has opportunities. And as Pierre was saying, you know, COVID, he can't prove who he is. His government doesn't know he exists. He won't be in queue for any food being distributed. He won't be in any line for vaccination programs for children when they're rolled out. He just doesn't exist. He's not there. And because of this little piece of paper, he slips further and further and further down, and his challenges become huge. We're talking about children. On the same trip, though, I met a grandma, a great-grandma, actually. She thought she was around early 80s, but she wasn't sure because she'd never been registered. And she said to me, she was a woman of faith, and she said to me, her biggest fear throughout her whole life, so this just isn't something that impacts 12-year-old boys, she said to me, I'm scared that when I die, God will not know who I am. She'd carried that fear her whole life because she hadn't been registered. I don't want that for Carlos. I want all those doors open for him, and I want him to have the opportunities he deserves, the same as my son deserves. So, Toy Box, what are we doing? I've given you a massive old story about Carlos there and how it's unacceptable. So we began our birth registration program over 7 years ago, and to date we've registered 7,000 children. Some of them super easy registrations. The process goes really easily and it's done very quickly. Others are really problematic. It takes months. The child hasn't got any connection to family. We can't find information. And in some situations, particularly in Central America, the judge has to give the child a name because the child is not even sure and make up a date of birth for the child. But once they've got that piece of paper, life begins in a different way. So we work with governments where we can. So in every opportunity, clearly working with governments and local authorities on, as Pierre was saying about Bolivia, those registration points, if we can get the government to move those registration points to more appropriate places, then of course we can register more children. And we have things like registration days where we get out water pools and slides and we get as many children as family in there to talk about registration, the importance of registration, and how it should be a priority for families. It is possibly the most wonderful thing in the world to witness somebody putting their little thumbprint on the machine and all of a sudden they are registered. And it is not just about all those doors opening, it's about self-worth. It's about a belief that you have a right to exist. You have a right to be recognized. You are important, you are valuable, and somebody cares about you, and your name is important. So identity is massive because it encompasses practical things, but it also encompasses how you feel about yourself, how you feel about all the possibilities you have. So we at Toy Box will continue to do this. And it is a simple pleasure to do it with my other colleagues around the world and all the local partners that Toy Box works with. So that is me with my whistle-stop tour of Toy Box and a little bit about birth registration.
Lynn, thank you very much. It's just extraordinary listening to you and Pia talk about how important a piece of paper is. Because as a lawyer, pieces of paper have been, for my life, a very, important thing, but you can't even envisage what this means for kids not to have. It's just extraordinary. And thank you so much for both of you for bringing it to the fore and really explaining what that issue is. We're going to just shift to India with Maura and Hope Charity, because India's of course been in the news for all the wrong reasons lately. And we know that street children have been a real issue in India for a lot longer than this. But this must have been a really, really hit things hard in the country and with the work that you're doing. So please do tell us about the work that the Hope Foundation does.
Thanks very much indeed, everybody. Really a great pleasure, as the ladies have said, to be with you today. I'm with you from the west of Ireland, but hopefully I'll bring you to Kolkata in India, where Hope concentrates its work. So yeah, maybe I hope I'll give you a very quick summary on where why Hope is and where we've come from. And Hope was established 21 years ago by an Irish lady, Maureen Forrest, who is still the honorary director of the Hope Foundation. We are a non-governmental organisation with head office in the south of Ireland. We have a small office in the UK, a very small office in the US, and all of our work is in Kolkata, formerly Calcutta, Kolkata in West Bengal. And I think I need to start probably today, bring you to the stories of today, where we are, because as you have said there, Nancy, over the last 6, 7, 8 weeks, you know, with the second wave of COVID in India, you know, it has been incredibly difficult, you know, a situation that was already difficult for our street connected community and population has just, we have had a myriad of emergencies really on top of the COVID emergency, I feel. Hope's primary focus is working with street connected children and slum dwelling communities in Kolkata. And as I say, established 21 years ago. And our overriding vision is of a world where it never should hurt to be a child. And I know my colleagues there have spoken about the hurt that children, street connected children feel. And we see that on a daily basis, obviously. We are exclusively implementing our programs with our national Indian staff, of which we have over 550 now. And we have 6 implementing partner organizations as well, local Indian organizations. Maureen Forrest started the organization with a trip to Calcutta, where she was volunteering with another Irish organization at the time, and she saw the real plight of children on the street, and particularly girls, and she set about establishing a safe, secure, protected place for 20 young girls from the ages of 3 up to 12 at that point. And she set up what she called a protection home for those girls 21 years ago. And the organization has grown since then, and we currently have 11 such protection homes. And I'd like to say at the outset, whilst these are homes homes for children who otherwise would be living on the street in very, as you all know, very dangerous, very difficult, very challenging circumstances, but they are home from homes. And we still believe that home is the best place for a child to be cared for and to grow up in. But where home is not safe, we believe that the child needs to be in a protected, safe environment. And that's why we have these established 11 protection homes, with the ultimate objective of reintegrating children with their families or their extended families, or safe environments, safe family environments. And whilst the children are in the protection homes of Hope, they are given every care and love and support, physical, mental, psychological, recreational care that they need, ranging from healthcare to education to counselling to sports to fun to drama to everything that any of our own kids have and deserve and are entitled to. We also work very closely with government, national, regional and local government authorities to ensure that we're not setting up parallel systems, obviously, and where possible, the children in our care are integrated into local government schools for their education. We also are working on the street with children to educate them on the streets where we can't have them, where they cannot be integrated into government schools. They are provided on the street education with their own educators. We also have a very significant input into the medical care of street connected children and slum dwelling communities in a hospital that we established 13 years ago. So we have our own Hope Hospital in Kolkata, which is exclusively for the medical and surgical, indeed, care of those who otherwise would have nowhere to go for their care, their medical care. Because access to all of these basic services, as you all know, is incredibly challenging and non-existent for people on the street, children on the street and slum dwelling families. And the hospital, I suppose, really has had to come into its own, certainly over the course of the last 18 months of COVID, but in particular over the last 8 weeks, over the second deadly wave. So at the beginning of April this year, we had 40 beds in the Hope Hospital, which were medical surgical beds. They were a small medical surgical facility. By the 10th of April, we had converted 15 of those beds to COVID care patients. By the middle of April, we had converted 25 beds. And by the beginning of May, we had 53 beds exclusively for COVID treatment. And these, I mean, the hospital could only facilitate 40 beds. So I don't know where our staff, they just made spaces in departments that were previously for physio or for eye care or whatever, converted them into COVID care beds. And with that, of course, it was high intensive care for patients who required ventilation and who required very intensive treatment for COVID. So there was a huge requirement to upskill, provide medical equipment that we weren't used to using heretofore. So it was really like an intensive care unit for 53 patients suffering from COVID. And this we turned around very, very quickly in a matter of weeks. And we also established a second satellite medical facility with 15 beds for COVID care, intensive medical care for COVID patients. So, as I say, very quickly we found ourselves with almost 70 beds with COVID patients. Now the situation on a medical front with COVID at the moment, things have, dare I say, improved slightly in that we're not seeing as many patients presenting with COVID. So with the numbers of those patients with COVID, we have been able to reconvert back some of our beds to regular medical and surgical care. However, we're not being complacent about it, because it's only as of yesterday really that the city of Kolkata has come out of lockdown. So with that, who knows in terms of how that's going to go. And as you all know, social distancing, all of them, the regular stuff that we've been accustomed to doing here, social distancing, hands on washing, masks, etc., has been very, very difficult and challenging in a city of 15 million people in Calcutta. So we are ready and prepared if and as and when we need to respond again in a very intensive way to what may be another round or another wave of the virus in weeks or months ahead. I suppose the other really important thing that happened as a result, and one of the girls, I think you alluded to it also, with lockdown, the street community whom we work with, they lost their livelihoods overnight. As you can appreciate, children on the street who are accustomed to rag picking or selling tea or daily labouring or domestic work, all of that was taken away in a matter of moments with lockdown. So these children, extended family members, slum dwellers, their meagre livelihoods were taken away from them. And like you said, Pia, no access to the basic food. So Hope had to implement, and still is implementing, an emergency food distribution program. We commenced that on the 10th of May in Calcutta, whereby we are distributing basic food rations every 2 weeks to families in the city. And that is going apace, and we will continue that for the weeks and months ahead as the needs are there. To date, we have distributed food to over 5,000 families, and as I say, that continues apace on a daily basis. We also, part of our program also, we have a night watch service where every night we go out from the hospital in the ambulance with social worker, with a pharmacist, with a nurse, with a doctor, and we go to pre-designated places on the street. And this we had pre-COVID anyway. It was one of our programs. We've intensified that with COVID. On the street every night to various communities, providing them with on the street health care, diagnosing and treating those who need medical treatment. So that has intensified, as I say, with COVID. And I know it's even saying it, it sounds so awful to think that it's literally on the street that we are treating patients, children, for illnesses on the street, but at least we are able to do that and give them access to the care that they require. It has also, I suppose, enabled us to avoid having to hospitalize some people. With the COVID, we've been able to treat them on the street again. I know it sounds awful to think that we're treating them on the street for COVID, but we've been able to do that, and that continues apace as well. And as I say, treating, it's also an opportunity, obviously, to bring children, bring adults who need more intensive care to the hospital, or to refer them to other services that we would be in contact with. Because, as you all know, working frontline like this within these communities, within these cities, you work very closely with other organisations and local authorities who are providing services as well. So there's a very good network and a communication to ensure that we can refer to those who can provide other services that perhaps Hope are not providing. So it's a very, very important frontline activity to be on the streets, really, whether it's day or night. Then in particular, it's a very different scenario, nighttime on the streets, but very important for an organisation like Hope to be there at night as well, as much as we can. I suppose, as I say, I feel we've been addressing a number of emergencies. Certainly the COVID has been one. Being on the street is an emergency in its own right, obviously. And then towards the end of May, we had Cyclone Yas that hit West Bengal. Thankfully not as intensively in Calcutta, the city, as we anticipated, but certainly in villages to the south of the city were very, very badly affected. So again, this was another emergency that we are currently responding to as an offshoot. So again, it's about providing essential food services, food supplies, clothing, tarpaulin, shelter materials, because there are families in villages that we are visiting day on day still who have lost everything as a result of this cyclone. So very quickly, I suppose, again, this has all happened, in a very short 6-7 weeks, and I have to commend and say that it's our staff on the ground who have just been heroic in every day and night of this. They have responded with huge efficiency and speed, and just, I suppose, it's been very comforting for us here to know that they can act so quickly and respond so efficiently and so effectively. And just, I suppose, again, just the local knowledge on the ground, experienced people who are pure humanitarians and know exactly what is required. And again, bringing it all the time back to ensuring that the most vulnerable and the most disadvantaged, and for us it is the street children whom we've been talking about. And for us in Hope, one of our responsibilities, we feel very much, is to give a voice to these children. They are invisible at every turn, really, and we want to make them visible, and we want to support them and enable them to have that visibility. And whether it is by ensuring that they have their identity, their physical paper identity, as you all have referred to, but also to ensure that they have access to the absolute basics that we all know and that we all enjoy, and that all of our children enjoy, in healthcare, in education, in play, in fun, in being a child, and living in a way that it should never hurt to be a child, as I've said. We in Hope also, we try to, be with children from the very young right through, bring them right through to a point where we hope to ensure that we can provide them with the tools to be as self-sufficient as possible into the future. And with that in mind, we also provide for vocational training. So we do have a vocational training unit within Hope whereby we provide young adolescents with a variety and choice of skills, whether it be in hairdressing or beauty or mechanics or whatever areas. We have training schemes that we can ensure that children get involved in if they so wish. Or indeed, for many of our children also going through second level education, they see that they want to go on to third level, and we also provide that facility for them as well. And we've some wonderful stories of success, from children who have, who really want to pursue academics or particular professions or career. And we've wonderful stories of success where we have children who have gone right through into and are living and enjoying great careers and lives as a result of going through to further education. We also have some lovely stories where we have children who were one day part of our protection home facilities, and now they are working with us, for example, as volunteers in the food distribution program, for example, in the COVID crisis or in the Cyclone Yas crisis. So it's really incredible to see young boys in particular, I'm thinking of, who were in one of our protection home, who are now working together as a team of volunteers. We have some lovely stories in particular where some of the boys who were in one of our protection homes in particular, who have now come together as a team of volunteers. They are young boys, 19, 20-year-olds, who have now come together as a team of volunteers to work with Hope in our emergency food distribution program with families who have been affected by Cyclone Yas. And so it's lovely to see that complete circle now. And I hope and see that we have, provided these wonderful kids with not only the education and the healthcare and the access to an identity, but also they also have this humanitarian spirit as well. And who better than children themselves who have seen and lived and breathed and know what it's like to suffer like they have. Who better than them to provide that care and support and love and real empathy with children on the streets today. So I think that's a lovely, as I say, completion of the full circle, if you like. So yeah, I suppose it's been a very, very intensive time for Hope over the last number of weeks and months, as I say, and but our fundamental and basic mission and vision doesn't change, or indeed that work doesn't change. And we really do believe in providing as much as possible, a very sustained approach to every aspect of our work. And certainly, the emergency side of things is one thing, but it's very much intertwined with our continued longer term development programs in ensuring that we can provide all of those children that we come in contact with, whatever services, whatever access to services that will ensure that they can reach their full potential, that they can somehow ensure that their lives into the future and their future family lives will be, enriched by ensuring that they have that identity, that they are valued and that they know they are valued, and that they will contribute to society into the future. As I say, I really want to commend also our staff in India, who've just been incredible and continue to be incredible. And we are mere handmaidens here, I feel, facilitators on this side of the world, to ensure that they can deliver on our programs. But also I feel very strongly, and Hope feels very strongly, as I said at the outset, that we are a voice for street children who have no voice oftentimes. So we really want to ensure that we give them a voice, give them a platform at every available opportunity, to let them, the rest of the world, know that they do matter and that they're not invisible, and that they have a voice and a visibility and a real richness that we want to share with everybody. So I thank you so much for this opportunity, and I really look forward actually to developing relationships also with the consortium, develop further relationships with the consortium, and indeed with Toy Box and other organisations, like-minded organisations, because I do feel that together, obviously, we can have even a greater and a stronger voice. So thank you very much for the opportunity.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you so much for reminding us too about the cyclone and just how vulnerable these communities are, because it's not just the day-to-day things, it's also all kinds of disasters that affect these communities. We have 10 minutes left. I just want to ask all three of you, we'll start with Pia, a question, and that is, if we can just rewind to before COVID hit, would you have said that that things were getting better, and for street children, were things improving, and then how has the last year and a half changed that? If it has, maybe it's just knocked it sideways for a bit, and then but where would you say are things go? Where are things going? Pia.
Brilliant question, Nancy. And I think I would say there are some, while there's some really positive, we're all about, us as an organisation, are all about how do we try to put in place the things that allow for sustainable change, so that all the emergency stuff that Moira's doing has just talked about, which is absolutely amazing. There are mechanisms in place to do that. And I think there were some really positive signs that things were improving on that front. Including, the work that we were able to do with many partners on getting the UN to specifically give countries guidance on street children. But I'd say even before COVID, one of the difficult trends that was happening was that while countries have become, the story of the world is less about inequality between countries, we've seen greater inequalities within countries, and that there are worrying trends on that, and they do massively affect children, and we see disproportionate impacts of poverty on children. So that was a trend that was pre-COVID. And as you say, Nancy, COVID it's so difficult for us to quantify what has happened over the last 15 months, and we're relying on the kind of, what the data that's coming back, somewhat anecdotally, but somewhat accounted by our partners. But maybe others can add to that.
And what's your experience?
I think for me it's twofold, really. I would say that there was definitely an improvement on conversation. So I felt that street children were part of conversations and people were starting to engage there, particularly at sort of national and regional government level. So they wanted to get the situation sorted in some context. I think for me, it goes right back to what I said at the beginning. Street children are no longer that historical, there's a child lying under the bridge. They're viewed as an economic commodity. And I hate using that phrase, but that's the reality. So there are people out there who are like, oh, you are an economic commodity I can exploit. And that's where the situation for me has deteriorated. And because they're hidden and because they're invisible and we can't see them, it makes it more problematic. So I think the situation was increasing from that side pre-COVID. And I think COVID has just knocked us all sideways. I would absolutely agree with Pia that we don't have the data yet, but the anecdotal stories coming back to me are that parents have died of COVID, so now the child is on the street. So historically the child wasn't on the street, but mom and dad are dead, so the child is now on the street. The idea that they've had no informal economy, so people at that really low rung where it's like day-to-day existence, and if I don't make my dollar today, I don't eat. Well, that was all stripped away. So of course, those folk are in an even more precarious situation. Education opportunities lost, just a whole year for some countries where the education system just stopped. So I would say that COVID has knocked us back. But I would also say COVID has taught us lessons. Boy, has it taught us lessons. So we will be able to leapfrog some situations. So it's not that we've been knocked really low down and we're starting from that low base. We're leapfrogging. And I think there's such determination to do something from a Toy Box perspective, staff, our partners, our amazing supporters. So I don't feel disheartened. I feel we've learned a shed load of lessons and we need to take those lessons and quickly get them in, not waste time, but get going as soon as we can in each context.
Thank you. Maura?
Yeah, well, I suppose with a name like Hope, we are ever hopeful, obviously, so that is ingrained in us. Starting with COVID again, I have to echo what the girls have said there, because we, yes, anticipate, a rise in child trafficking, for example, also, which is a very important issue that needs to be put on the table as well. And we fear for children on that front. We also we also know, obviously, that children's parents or carers have been lost to COVID. So yes, we anticipate that our requirement to care for more children, potentially in protection homes, will increase as a result of COVID. So we are, ready and prepared for that. From a hope perspective, over the last 21 years, look, we'd like to think there have been some improvements, certainly, and we have some great stories of success, as I said, on a personal level for hope. But on the other hand, our requirement to exist and to be in a city like Calcutta has not waned, and we see the requirement for us to be there and to work for the rights of the street connected children is as strong as ever and as needed as ever. So, from that perspective, I'm loath to say that it has improved as such, but from the perspective of ensuring that children are integrated into local systems of education or whatever like that, yes, we can see great successes over the last number of years on that front. But it is all down to a very persistent development of relationships at all levels, within Calcutta in our case, from the street right up, So I think it's a mixed bag in terms of whether or not, Nancy, we see improvement or not. But COVID, yes, certainly has, and I would agree, it has not knocked us down. Certainly, it has made us stronger in many respects, but it has caused an awful lot of pain and suffering, and even down to simple things like for the children who are in our protection homes, not being able to go outside, not being able to receive visitors. It's been extremely difficult for them, I have to say. Yeah.
Thank you all. So we've got just a couple of minutes, so let me just ask one final thing. If you had a magic wand, in one or two words, what would that magic wand deliver out of its tip? Pia?
Great national policies to support children who are on the street, so that governments are doing their part.
Lynn?
Devastating compassion.
Maura?
Visibility.
Super. Thank you all very much for an amazing session and so inspiring listening to all of you. Thank you all very much for coming. This will be on our website, so please do feel free to direct people to it, and to be able that might benefit from this. And thank you all for speaking. Thank you all for coming, and I wish you all a good day, and wherever you are, continued sunshine and warmth. So all the very best, and thank you very much for coming, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks, Nancy.